My name is Father John Corbett. I teach at the Dominican House of Study. Eric, you want to do your introduction again, too? Okay. Start over. I want to say that theology starts from Revelation, and our reflection, deepest reflection as believers, start from Revelation. We need to put that on the table because it allows us to let other people see what's really not negotiable for us. And I think that when we get in conversation with other people as well, they also have non-negotiable starting places. And I don't think they admit so much of direct dispute or contradiction. They do admit of elucidation. And that's what we're going to be aiming at today. I hope that to elucidate some of the basic starting premises of the Catholic faith and its position on what marriage is and is not, and why homosexual unions could not ever really be what we mean by marriage. But I also think that we need, as believers, to give an account of the faith, not simply present it. And I think that means we need to show that our account of the faith on this matter is internally coherent, that it makes sense on its own, that it's internally consistent and reasonable in that sense, and also that it actually commends itself to reason. That is to say that the account that we offer of marriage explains some things which are difficult to explain otherwise. You see, now, explaining some things that are difficult to explain otherwise doesn't constitute a proof or a philosophical demonstration, but it does at least commend the faith to someone else's reason who isn't necessarily approaching this discussion from the perspective of faith. See? So what I want to do today is the two tasks. First is to look briefly at Genesis and its teaching on man and woman. This is from the faith perspective. I want to look at Genesis and see what it has got to say about the relationships between men and women, and what the theological significance of that relationship is, and why, therefore, from the perspective of the Scriptures, same-sex marriage would be an impossible project. And in doing this, I'm stealing egregiously from the work of Francis Martin. Do you know his work? Okay, he's written a very good book on feminism and other articles on biblical theology, so I'm relying on his exegesis here to make intelligible, to kind of elucidate what Genesis has to say on the subject. And then, as we do need to look at the point of view, this question from the point of view of philosophy or reason, which in no way depends upon revelation for its starting point. Is there anything that we have to offer to this discussion that doesn't depend upon revelation and which nevertheless commends itself to people's reason? I think there is, and I'm going to be relying here, following some of the main arguments of a philosopher you may know named Robert George, who wrote a very influential article on this very topic 2 years ago. Let's start with Romans. Let's start with the most inflammatory text we can find, except maybe Leviticus, which is probably even more offensive. But let's start with Romans. That will do. All right. Yeah. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men who by their wickedness suppress the truth. Okay. They are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Okay. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, or birds, or animals, or reptiles. Therefore God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in their own person the due penalty for their error. This is a nice opening text for ecumenical discussion. This is 1:18 through 23. Chapter 1, verses 18 through 23. Okay. Now, this suggests, you see, that in Paul's mind, the phenomenon of homosexuality, same-sex attraction, is rooted in idolatry. They gave up, as a punishment for their sin, you see, it's the other way around. First they were committing idolatry, and as a consequence, a natural consequence of the idolatry, they became consumed with passion one for another. Now this is not likely to commend itself to the view of a developmental psychologist, but it has its own internal theological coherence. How so? Well, what is idolatry? Idolatry has to do with the making of the image of God. Alright, falsely. Making an image of God where this is uncalled for. Making an image of God that is in fact a false image, and then worshiping the image. What is that linked to? Well, idolatry ultimately, as Paul says, is where in attempting to make an image of God contrary to God's will or regulation, the image that is made is not of God at all, and therefore is false, and it ends up being a false image of the human person. You know, in Genesis, in Exodus, where they talk about in the Decalogue, and when the prohibition of idolatry is listed, there's language reminiscent of Romans here, where he talks about making images of birds in the sky, or beasts on the earth, or beasts that live under the earth. See, these are all pictures, and some worshippers, some religions really do have pictures of God that look like monstrous beasts. But the insight here is that the beasts that are carved in stone, which are reputed to resemble God, are actually a depiction of the distorted human being's consciousness of himself. See? Why is this the case? Why would a false image of God involve a false image of a human person? Because human beings are made in the image of God. If you get the image of God wrong, therefore, you are always going to get the image of the human person wrong. Okay? So idolatry inevitably involves anthropology, and a false anthropology. Now, so at Paul then, to follow the argument, Paul is interpreting homosexuality as a manifestation of idolatry, which is therefore a manifestation of a falsification of the imago Dei, what it means to be the image of God. See? Therefore, homosexuality distorts in a unique way the imago Dei in the human person. How does it do that? It can only do that if a male-female relationship is somehow normative for the full mirroring of the image of God in the human person. See the argument? That if homosexuality is linked to idolatry, and idolatry is linked to a false image of God, and a false image of God is linked to a false image of the human person, then homosexuality involves a false image of the human person precisely in his relational dimensions. See? precisely in the capacity to relate to man or to woman.